She stood in the briefing room while men twice her size smirked, and no one bothered to ask who she was. Why would they? She didn't look dangerous. No rank on her chest. No stories attached to her name. Just a woman standing slightly apart, hands still, eyes steady, carrying herself like someone who had learned long ago not to take up more space than necessary. The laughter wasn't loud. It never is. It was the quiet kind, the kind that assumes it's safe. Someone whispered, "Ask your general who I am," mimicking her under his breath. A few chuckles followed. She didn't react. She never did. Because silence, she'd learned, was a form of armor. The helicopter blades cut through the night sky like a prayer whispered too late. February 1985. Cold pressed through metal, through gloves, through bone. Captain Nadia Corvus rested one gloved hand against the window, watching the city below flicker beneath Soviet occupation. Cobble City looked almost peaceful from above. It never was. She had killed 17 men in her life. 16 of them deserved it. The 17th visited her dreams. Across from her sat the youngest operator in the program's history. Sloane Kieran, 17 years old. Small, quiet, trying very hard not to be afraid. Her hands shook, not from the cold, but from the knowledge that fear had consequences here. Corvus noticed, of course she did. She reached across the narrow space and placed her hand over Sloane's. No words, no reassurance, just pressure, presence. The kind of comfort soldiers gave when language failed. 3 minutes to drop, the pilot's voice crackled. 4-minute patrol gap. 4 minutes, that was all the world was giving them. They touched down for 12 seconds. Not one more. Then the helicopter vanished, and they were alone in enemy territory. 6 people the world would deny knowing. Corvus moved point. She always did. Leadership to her meant stepping into danger first. They moved like smoke through streets that smelled of diesel and desperation. Twice, Soviet patrols passed within 20 meters. Twice, they became nothing. The depot rose out of the darkness, predictable in all the right ways. Predictable meant survivable. Sloane's entrance was a ventilation shaft, barely wide enough for a child. That was why she was here. She looked at Corvus. Corvus nodded once. Go. Inside the shaft, the world narrowed to metal and breath. Fear made the space smaller, time louder. Her shoulder protested at the turn. She ignored it. She had learned early that pain was often a warning you couldn't afford to heed. When she dropped into the storage room, her hands were steady. "I'm in," she whispered. "Copy," Corvus replied. "Timer starts now." 16 minutes. Sloane moved through the facility like something that had never been meant to be seen. Darkness, timing, and the fact that people rarely looked up carried her past guards who never knew how close death came. The crates in the loading bay were marked with symbols that turned her stomach. Chemical agents, enough to erase a city. She placed the charges with precision learned through repetition and fear. Timer set, 15 minutes. Halfway back, the lights came on. Alarm screamed, boots thundered. Abort west wall, 30 seconds. She ran. Not tactically, not gracefully. She ran because survival sometimes demanded speed instead of perfection. The grenade landed between them like punctuation. Corvus didn't think. She moved. She grabbed Sloane, turned, and made herself the wall. The blast tore through the night. When Sloane came back to herself, Corvus was on top of her, blood soaking through gear that had once been immaculate. Her legs didn't move. Shrapnel had rewritten the rest of her life in an instant. "Quiet ones survive," Corvus whispered, fingers leaving blood on Sloane's cheek. "Remember that." She survived. Paralyzed. Unbroken. For 29 years, Captain Nadia Corvus taught others how not to die, from a wheelchair, without complaint. She died in 2014. Sloane wore the brass compass Corvus gave her to the funeral. She didn't cry. Quiet ones survive. 16 years later, the Georgia heat hit Sloane Kieran the moment she stepped out of her truck. Fort Benning hadn't changed. People rarely do. The guard studied her paperwork longer than necessary. Something didn't add up for him. He let her through anyway. Alpha Company was already forming up when she walked into the yard. Fresh faces, fresh confidence. The kind that hadn't yet learned restraint. "Looks like somebody's mom," someone whispered. She heard it. She always did. Master Sergeant Garrison didn't smile when he told her she'd observe by participating. Fine. The push-ups separated strength from endurance. She moved like someone who knew how to conserve oxygen. The sprints revealed economy over aggression. But it was the obstacle course that stole the laughter. She didn't fight it. She read it. Walls became ladders, ropes became physics, wire became something she flowed under like water finding its level. 4 minutes, 18 seconds. A record. She said nothing. On the range, she inspected the rifle like a conversation between old friends. Her shots erased the center of the target. When asked to explain, she did so without ego. Just facts. And then the colonel arrived. Colonel Mercer didn't speak at first. He watched. 10 minutes of silence. Then 5 words. "Roll up your left sleeve." The serpent emerged slowly. Black ink. A blade. A viper coiled in readiness. Mercer leaned close. "That's a black viper mark." The yard changed. Garrison went pale. The recruits didn't understand yet, but they felt it. Mercer spoke loud enough for everyone. "You've been laughing at someone who passed trials most of you will never even hear about." He looked at Sloane. "Where did you earn it?" "Cobble City, February 1985. The math crushed the air out of the yard. 17. The colonel didn't embellish, he didn't praise. He explained what silence had cost. 97 went in. 31 came out. Then he walked away. Sloane rolled her sleeve down. The secret had surfaced. She hadn't wanted that. But dignity doesn't argue. It simply stands. And waits. She didn't sleep that night. Not because of nerves. Not because of fear. Because memory doesn't obey schedules. The ceiling above her temporary apartment was unfamiliar, but the darkness behind her eyes was old. It carried the same weight it always had, the smell of dust and cordite, the sound of alarms turning panic into mathematics, the feeling of another body shielding her from death. She lay still, breathing slow, counting heartbeats the way Corvus had taught her. Quiet ones survive. At 03:30 she gave up on rest. By the time dawn reached Fort Benning, Sloane Kieran was already moving. Why did the men look different this morning? That question followed her as she walked back into the training yard. No laughter. No whispers. No casual confidence. Just eyes. Watching her now. Studying her. Trying to reconcile the woman they had dismissed with the ghost Colonel Mercer had named. Respect hadn't arrived yet. Respect took time, but disbelief had cracked. That was enough. Master Sergeant Garrison stood straighter than he had on day one, not rigid, focused. When he spoke, there was no edge left in his voice. "Today is advanced instruction," he said. "Listen carefully." He stepped aside. And for the first time, Sloane stood at the front. She didn't raise her voice. Didn't need to. "Marksmanship isn't about hitting targets," she said quietly. It's about understanding why you miss. The words landed heavier than shouting ever could. She lifted an M4 not like a prop but like a familiar weight, something she trusted but never romanticized. You already know how fast this round travels, she continued. You know it drifts in the wind. What you don't know yet is how to see what the air is doing. She adjusted the optic and held it up so they could look. Mirage, she said. Heat waves aren't distortion, they're information. She let them look one by one. Some squinted. Some frowned. One nodded slowly, understanding flickering behind his eyes. She taught them how to read movement in the air, how to translate shimmer into speed, guesswork into math. No speeches. No ego. Just quiet correction. A half-inch here. A breath slower there. By mid-morning, the targets told a different story. Groups tightened. Misses shrank. Not because they were stronger, but because they were thinking. She watched them closely. Not as students. As people. Some carried impatience like a weapon. Others carried doubt like a wound. A few, very few, carried something else. Hunger. One of them was Boone Whitlock. He didn't talk much today. He watched, wrote, adjusted. When his shots improved, he didn't smile. He frowned harder, like improvement was a debt he intended to pay in full. Sloane noticed. She always noticed. By noon, the Georgia heat pressed down like a hand on the back of the neck. Sweat soaked through uniforms. Muscles shook, not from weakness, but from fatigue layered on effort layered on expectation. They broke for chow. Most ate in silence. Boone sat apart, notebook open, scribbling numbers that would mean nothing to anyone else. Sloane stopped beside him. "Why write?" she asked. He looked up, startled. "So I don't forget," he said honestly. "Details fade." "They don't fade," she corrected. "They get replaced." She tapped the notebook once. "Keep writing." That was all. She moved on. The afternoon belonged to movement. Not running. Moving. "How visible are you when you think you're hidden?" she asked, standing at the edge of the tree line. No one answered. "Watch." She stepped into the woods. She didn't disappear. She dissolved. One moment she was there. The next, only motionless branches and broken lines remained. She reappeared 30 meters away, not fast, not dramatic, just inevitable. "The human eye tracks motion," she said. "Not shape, not color. Break the motion, you break the sightline." They tried. They failed. They learned. Boots snapped branches, shoulders skylined ridges. Breath came too loud, too fast. She corrected without scolding. "Slow down. Lower. Listen." Boone made it farther than the others. "Not perfect, but thoughtful." "Again," she said. He nodded. At the end of the day, exhaustion settled into them like a truth they couldn't ignore anymore. Confidence had been replaced by effort. That night the doubt returned. It always did when fatigue stripped away distraction. 3 recruits whispered in the barracks long after lights out. "She's good," one said, "but 17, come on." Tattoo could be fake. Programs like that don't just vanish. They didn't notice Sloane at the door until she spoke. "You want proof?" Her voice was calm. Not offended. Just tired. She showed them the photo. 6 people, dust, fear, youth frozen in grainy black and white. A girl who should have been worrying about school stood among soldiers with eyes too old for their faces. "That's my team," Sloane said. 4 died later. 1 lived paralyzed. I lived because I was small enough to be protected. Silence swallowed the room. She didn't ask for belief. She didn't demand apology. "Question everything," she said. Just don't confuse doubt with dismissal. She left. Outside, alone again, she sat in her truck and rested her forehead against the steering wheel. It never got easier, dragging the past into daylight. But Corvus had asked her to teach. Teaching required truth. The final exercise briefing came at dawn. 6 hours. Evasion. Opposing force. No safety net. Sloane listened as Garrison explained the rules. She didn't look at the recruits. She watched how they listened. Some swallowed hard. Some clenched fists. Boone squared his shoulders. Good. Fear that sharpened you was useful. They rolled out into the woods as the sun climbed. At first, they did well. They moved deliberately. Chose terrain carefully. Then the first ambush hit. Paint bloomed like blood. Chaos followed. Some froze. Some fired blind. Exactly what training existed to prevent. Sloane stayed silent. This was their test. Boone found his voice. Pulled them back. Regrouped. What did we do wrong? He asked, not her but them. Answers came slowly. Thoughtfully. They moved again. Better. Still not enough. Time slipped away. When morale cracked, Sloane spoke just once. You're not failing, she said quietly. You're learning what failure feels like. That mattered. When Boone proposed taking the ridge, the obvious route, she didn't stop him. She warned him. Risk was part of reality. The ridge ambushed them anyway. This time they reacted. Fire and movement. Not pretty, but alive. When the extraction point loomed closer and hope for forces tightened the net, Boone made one last choice. We stop running, he said. We make them react. They ambushed the hunters. For the first time, the recruits weren't prey. They were thinking. When the 6 hours ended, fewer than half remained. But they had reached the extraction. Barely. As Garrison called end exercise, Sloane looked at them, muddy, exhausted, shaken. Different. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And leaves the lesson behind. Why did the silence feel heavier after they survived? The extraction smoke drifted upward, blew against the trees, while the recruits stood scattered and breathing hard, faces streaked with mud, eyes hollowed by effort, hands still shaking, not from fear anymore, but from the aftershock of responsibility. They had made it. And somehow that made everything worse. Sloane watched them without stepping forward. Survival had changed them, but it hadn't finished its work yet. It never did all at once. Master Sergeant Garrison dismissed the exercise with clipped efficiency. Med checks, accountability, logistics, the machinery of order resumed as if the woods hadn't tried to swallow them whole an hour earlier. The recruits filed off in small clusters. No one joked. No one bragged. They had learned something unteachable. Boone lingered. He stood at the edge of the clearing, helmet dangling from one hand, eyes fixed on the tree line as if something might still emerge. When the others were gone, he finally turned. Was that how it was? He asked. Sloane knew what he meant. No, she said, it was worse. He nodded once, absorbing that without argument. Then, hesitating, how do you live with it afterward? The question surprised her, not because it was deep, but because it was honest. She considered lying. She didn't. You don't, she said. You just learn how to carry it without dropping everything else. That night, rain came without warning. Georgia storms didn't ask permission. They arrived loud and sudden, drenching the base in minutes. Sloane stood under the awning outside the barracks, watching water hammer the concrete. Rain always did this to her. Cobble City had smelled like rain after the blast, like wet stone and metal and blood trying to disappear into gutters that couldn't carry it all away. She rubbed her wrist unconsciously. The compass wasn't there. She still felt it anyway. Inside the barracks, someone was crying. Quietly, trying not to be heard. Sloane didn't go in. She knew the sound too well. At 02:11, alarms shattered the night. Not training alarms. Real ones. Red strobes painted the corridors as voices crackled over loudspeakers. Fast, clipped, urgent. All personnel report. Immediate assembly. Sloane was already moving. She pulled on boots, grabbed her jacket, and stepped into controlled chaos. Officers ran with purpose. Phones pressed to ears. The air vibrated with something unspoken but unmistakable. This wasn't about them. This was bigger. In the command building, a screen glowed with satellite imagery, a coastal outline, a grid, red markers blinking like open wounds. Colonel Mercer stood at the center, hands braced on the table. When he saw Sloane, his posture shifted, not deferential but precise. "She's here," he said. The room went quiet. "This is classified beyond your pay grade," one analyst said automatically, then stopped himself. Mercer didn't correct him. He just looked at Sloane. "We lost a drone," Mercer said. "Over the Black Sea, no signal, no wreckage, and then this." He gestured to the screen. A convoy, unmarked, moving at night, too careful to be smugglers, too fast to be local. "What do you need?" Sloane asked. Mercer exhaled. "A ghost," he said. "Someone who can look at nothing and see intent." She studied the footage. Tiny shifts in spacing, speed adjustments, headlights briefly dimmed then restored. "They're trained," she said, "but not disciplined." "Explain." "They're watching each other more than the terrain," she replied. "That means mistrust. That means they're scared." "Of what?" She leaned closer. "Of being seen." Mercer nodded slowly. "You want eyes on the ground," Sloane said. "Not satellites, someone who can feel the pattern." "You're not cleared," the analyst started again. Mercer cut him off. "She's the clearance." The decision wasn't spoken aloud, but it was made. An hour later, Sloane stood on the tarmac beside a transport plane humming with readiness. The rain had stopped. The air smelled clean and dangerous. Boone stood at the edge of the light. She hadn't noticed him approach. "They said you were leaving," he said. "They wouldn't say where." She didn't answer directly. "Training continues," she said. "You'll finish it." "That's not what I meant." He swallowed. "You didn't have to stay after today. You could have disappeared again." She met his eyes. "I don't disappear," she said quietly. "I just don't announce myself." He nodded, then surprised her by standing straighter. "Bring them back," he said. She understood who them was. "I'll try," she replied. That was the only promise she ever made. The flight was long and silent. Maps, briefings, names that meant nothing until they did. The insertion was coastal, night, cold, familiar in the worst ways. She moved alone. Not because she didn't trust others, but because some work demanded solitude. The shoreline was quiet, too quiet. She waited, listened, counted waves until the rhythm felt wrong. That's when she saw it. A flicker, not light, absence of it. A shape where shadow shouldn't be. She slowed her breathing. There, a man watching the water, rifle slung but not relaxed. She could have taken him. She didn't. She followed instead. The convoy was closer than intelligence suggested. Vehicles hidden under netting. Men speaking in low, sharp bursts of a language she half recognized. Not local. One of them laughed. It was forced. Fear again. She moved around the perimeter, cataloging details. Tires, tracks, the way centuries shifted their weight. They were waiting for something. Her radio crackled once, an accidental brush of signal. Every head snapped up. So much for ghosts. Shouts, movement, weapons raised. Sloane ran. Not panicked. Purposeful. She led them away from the convoy, deeper into scrub and rock, where their numbers meant less. Shots cracked behind her. Too high. Too rushed. She dropped, rolled, vanished into terrain that swallowed mistakes. One man followed too eagerly. She waited, then ended it quickly. When the helicopters came, dawn was bleeding into the horizon. The convoy burned. Evidence gone. Questions answered and replaced with worse ones. Back at base, Mercer listened to her report without interruption. When she finished, he leaned back, older suddenly. "You could have stayed hidden," he said. "You chose not to." She shrugged. "Hiding is easy," she said. "Responsibility is." Later, alone again, Sloane sat outside and watched the sky lighten. Her hands trembled now. The delay always came later. She let it. Because strength wasn't about never breaking. It was about knowing you could put yourself back together. Quietly, one piece at a time. And somewhere far away, a young recruit woke up understanding, for the first time, that survival wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of carrying it forward. Why did the hardest part always come after the mission was over? Sloane felt it as the transport touched down, that hollow pressure in her chest, like the body bracing for something that never quite arrived. The adrenaline had burned away hours ago. What remained was quieter, heavier, the kind of weight you couldn't shake out of your hands. Debriefing took 3 hours. No one raised their voice. No one congratulated her. Professionals rarely did. They asked about spacing, angles, hesitation. They asked about the man she chose not to shoot. They asked about the one she did. She answered every question without emotion. Not because she didn't feel it. Because feeling it here would make it harder to survive later. When it was done, Mercer walked her to the door. "You saved us a war," he said, not smiling. "Or delayed one," she replied. "That's all anyone ever does." She nodded and stepped into the hallway alone. The base felt different now, quieter, like it knew something it wasn't supposed to say out loud. She returned to the barracks just before dawn. Lights were on. Not all of them, but enough. Someone was awake. Boone sat on his bunk, boots on, hands clasped, eyes lifted the moment she entered. He didn't ask where she'd been. He didn't ask what she'd done. He just said, "You came back." She paused. "I said I'd try." He exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath longer than he realized. The others stirred. One by one, heads turned. No cheers, no questions, just awareness. She felt it settle over them, something between relief and understanding. She didn't belong to them, but she belonged with them. Training resumed that morning. No allowances, no soft landings. If anything, Garrison pushed harder. Longer rucks, less sleep, more repetition. Stress was a teacher that didn't care about feelings. Sloane stayed mostly silent now. They didn't need instruction anymore. They needed friction. During a night navigation exercise, one recruit broke down. Dropped to his knees in the dark, hands pressed to his helmet, breath coming too fast. "I can't," he started. No one moved. Fear was contagious if mishandled. Sloane stepped forward and knelt beside him. "Look at me," she said quietly. He did. "You're not failing," she told him. "You're overloaded." She placed his hand flat against the dirt. "Cold, solid, real," she said. "Stay here for 10 seconds." He did. The shaking slowed. She didn't say he was strong, didn't tell him it would be okay. She just gave him something to anchor to. Later, Garrison approached her. "You didn't pull him," he said. "No," Sloane replied. "He didn't need pulling." That night, Mercer called her into his office again. This time, the mood was different. No screens, no urgency. Just 2 chairs. "Sit," he said. She did. "There's a reason the name Black Viper makes people uncomfortable," Mercer said. "It's not because of what you did. It's because of what the program represented." She waited. "It wasn't meant to exist long," he continued. "Precision assets, disposable, plausibly deniable in every sense." Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "They erased the records," he said, "except the scars." "And the people," Sloane added. "Yes." He leaned forward. "We're forming something new, not a unit, a doctrine, quiet integration, people who can operate without spectacle." "You want permission to use me," she said flatly. "I want your consent." That surprised her. "You could order me," she said. Mercer shook his head. "That would defeat the point." Silence stretched between them. "I'm tired," Sloane said finally, not as a complaint, as a fact. "I know," Mercer replied. "That's why I'm asking." She thought of Corvus, of a woman who taught from a chair because she refused to disappear. "I won't recruit," Sloane said. "I won't promise outcomes." Mercer nodded. "Teach them how not to lose themselves," she continued. "That's all I'll offer." "That's enough." The next day, one of the recruits recognized the tattoo. "Not from rumor. From history." "My grandfather," the recruit said hesitantly, standing at attention, "served in Eastern Europe. Intelligence. He talked about shadows, about a girl who walked through alarms like they were suggestions." Sloane met his gaze. "Stories change," she said. "Yes, ma'am, but he said one thing never did." "What's that?" "She never spoke unless it mattered." The words landed harder than praise. That afternoon, live fire training pushed the recruits to their limits. Fatigue made mistakes sharper, patience thinner. Boone miscalculated a transition. Not dangerous, but sloppy. Sloane stopped the line. She walked over, adjusted his stance, and stepped back. Again. He did better. Again. Better still. On the 4th repetition, she stopped him. "Why are you rushing?" she asked. He hesitated. "Because if I slow down, I start thinking." She nodded. "That's the trap," she said. "Thinking isn't the enemy. Letting fear decide what you think is." He absorbed that quietly. That night, Sloane finally broke. It wasn't dramatic. No collapse, no tears. Just a moment in the empty gym, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, staring at nothing. Her hands trembled. Her breathing stuttered. The faces came uninvited. 17. 16 deserved it. One still asked why. She pressed her palms into her eyes until light burst behind them. "I'm still here," she whispered, not to anyone else, to herself. The door creaked. She didn't look up. Boone stood there, unsure whether to enter. "You don't have to," he started. "I know," she said, "but you did anyway." He sat across from her, not too close. Not retreating either. "My sister," he said after a moment, "was a medic. She came back different." Sloane nodded once. "She said the hardest part wasn't what she saw," he continued. "It was realizing the world didn't see it with her." Sloane lowered her hands. "That's true," she said, "and it doesn't mean the world is wrong." He frowned. "What does it mean?" "It means your burden is yours," she replied, "but you don't have to carry it alone." They sat in silence after that. Not awkward. Shared. In the weeks that followed, something shifted. Not loud, not obvious. The recruits moved differently, watched each other's backs, asked better questions. They didn't idolize Sloane. They understood her. And that mattered more. On the final evaluation day, Mercer watched from a distance. When it ended, he approached her. "You changed them," he said. "No," Sloane replied. "They changed themselves." He smiled faintly. "Black Viper," he said softly. "You still don't like the name." She shook her head. "I like what survived it." As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the training field, Sloane stood alone again. But the loneliness felt different. Not empty. Chosen. Because sometimes, redemption isn't about being forgiven. It's about staying long enough to make sure the damage doesn't repeat itself. What happens when the people you trained are sent where you once bled? The question followed Sloane long before the orders arrived. She felt it in the tightening of the air around the base, in the way Mercer's meetings ran longer, quieter, in the way maps reappeared on screens they hadn't touched in weeks. History didn't repeat itself cleanly, but it liked to rhyme. The call came at 0240. Not an alarm. A knock. 3 soft raps on her door. She already knew who it would be. Mercer didn't sit this time. "We have movement," he said. "Same corridor, different players." Sloane listened without interrupting. An allied asset compromised. Communications blacked out. A recovery window closing faster than anyone wanted to admit. "They're not ready," Mercer finished. She didn't ask who. "You want me to go instead?" she said. "Yes." She exhaled slowly. "And you want me to let them watch," she added, "so they learn." Mercer didn't deny it. "They won't learn from watching me," Sloane said. "They'll learn from being trusted." Silence pressed in. "Boone leads," she said finally. Mercer studied her. "That's a lot of responsibility." "So is command," she replied. He nodded once. "Limited footprint," he said. "You're Overwatch only." She almost smiled. Almost. The night they deployed, the recruits didn't look like recruits anymore. Gear checked without chatter, hands steady, eyes sharp. Boone caught Sloane's gaze across the hangar. She gave a single nod. That was all. The insertion zone was cold, rocky, unforgiving. Eastern Europe again. Different decade, same bones. Sloane settled into her perch hours before first contact. Elevated terrain, clean sightlines, wind predictable but shifting. She breathed with the land. Below, the team moved like a thought becoming action. Not fast, not slow. Intentional. Her finger rested alongside the trigger, not on it. Overwatch wasn't about shooting. It was about restraint. The first sign of trouble was subtle. A light that went dark too quickly. A silhouette where there shouldn't have been one. Boone froze the team with a hand signal. Good. They adapted, rerouted. Better. Then the radio crackled once, twice. Too much. Sloane felt it then. The old tension, the question she never escaped. Do I intervene now or wait? She tracked the movement, counted breaths, calculated angles. The man appeared behind cover, rifle raised. Boone didn't see him. Not yet. This was the moment. The one that separated mentors from saviors. Sloane exhaled. And waited. Boone shifted just enough. Saw. Reacted. One clean movement, one clean shot. The threat dropped. Sloane's hands trembled, not from fear but from release. They didn't need her. Not like that. The mission continued, complications stacking like weight on tired shoulders. A wrong turn, a locked door, a choice with no clean outcome. The asset was alive, but injured. Movement slowed. Time became the enemy. Sloane watched as Boone made a call she wouldn't have. Riskier. More human. It worked. Barely. When extraction finally came, the team was battered but intact. No losses. No glory. Just breath and mud and disbelief. Back at base, the debrief felt different. Quieter. Mercer listened to Boone now. Sloane stayed in the corner. When it ended, Mercer dismissed everyone except her. "They didn't need you," he said. She nodded. That was the point. He hesitated. "And when they do?" She met his eyes. "I'll be there," she said, "just not in front." That night the team gathered in the common room. No celebration. Just presence. One of the younger operators finally spoke. "I thought courage was being fearless," he said. "Turns out it's deciding anyway." Sloane leaned against the wall. "Fear is information," she said. "Ignoring it is arrogance." Boone approached her later, voice low. "You let me almost fail," he said. She didn't flinch. "I let you succeed," she replied. He nodded, understanding settling in. Days passed. Then weeks. The program took shape quietly. No patches, no slogans. Just standards. Sloane didn't take command. She shaped culture. And culture, she knew, outlived orders. One evening she received a package. No return address. Inside was a photograph. 6 people. The same one. But this time, someone had written on the back. She didn't disappear, she multiplied. Sloane sat with it for a long time. Then she placed it back in the envelope and locked it away. Some things didn't need display. The next mission came sooner than expected. Different terrain, urban, dense, unforgiving. This time, Sloane went in with them. Not as a shield. As one more shadow. When things went wrong, and they always did, she felt the old pull again. The urge to step forward. To take the weight. Instead, she moved laterally. Covered gaps. Spoke only when necessary. They adjusted around her like a living system. When a shot rang out and one of them went down, not dead but hurt, panic surged. Sloane was there in seconds. Not with orders. With hands. Pressure, breath, focus. "Stay with me," she said softly. The operator did. Later in the quiet aftermath, Boone found her sitting alone. "You could have been anything," he said. "A legend, a story people tell." She looked at the horizon. "Legends end," she said. "People continue." He nodded. As the sun rose, casting pale light over a world that hadn't noticed their absence, Sloane felt something unfamiliar. Not peace, but alignment. She had survived. She had taught. And now she was watching something grow that didn't depend on her name. Because sometimes, strength isn't proven by how hard you strike, but by how willingly you step back and trust what you've built to stand on its own. Why did it feel harder to let go than it ever had to survive? Sloane realized it on a morning that looked like every other. Gray light, quiet corridors, boots echoing against concrete. Nothing was wrong, and that was the problem. The program no longer needed her. That truth didn't arrive with ceremony. It settled slowly like dust after a long march. The team moved without looking for her signals. Decisions were made cleanly. Disagreements resolved without raised voices. When things went wrong, they adapted. When they went right, they didn't celebrate. They had become exactly what she had hoped for. And hope, she was learning, came with its own kind of grief. Mercer confirmed it later that day. He didn't phrase it as an ending. He never did. "You've done what you came to do," he said, hands folded, eyes steady. "They'll rotate leadership internally. Oversight will remain, but not you. Sloane nodded. No argument, no relief. Just acceptance. There's another role, Mercer added carefully. Strategic advisory, remote. She considered it, then shook her head. If I stay, she said, they'll still listen for my voice, even when they shouldn't. Mercer studied her for a long moment. Black Viper, he said quietly, you were never meant to be permanent. Neither was the program, she replied. That's why it worked. He smiled, not as a colonel, but as a man who had seen too much. You'll vanish again, he said. No, Sloane corrected. I'll stop standing in the doorway. Her last day came without announcement. No formation, no speech. She packed her few belongings slowly. The compass finally returned to her wrist, a folded photograph, the jacket she never wore unless it mattered. She walked the training field once more. The dirt still held footprints. Some hers, most not. Boone saw her from a distance and approached, expression unreadable. They said you're leaving, he said. She nodded. Today. He looked away, jaw tightening. You didn't even say goodbye. I am, she said gently, this is it. Silence stretched between them. Not awkward. Honest. You know, Boone said finally, I used to think strength was about endurance, how much you could take. She waited. Now I think it's about knowing when to step aside. She smiled faintly. That lesson cost me years, she said. I'm glad it took you less. He hesitated, then did something unexpected. He saluted her. Not sharply, not theatrically. Just once clean. She returned it, and turned away before emotion could catch up. The drive off base was long and empty. Radio off, windows cracked. She let the road unwind her thoughts. Cobble City came back to her then, not as fire or panic, but as stillness. The moment after the blast, when sound vanished and the world narrowed to breath and pain and someone else's weight shielding her from the end. Corvus. She pulled over without realizing it. Sat with the engine ticking softly as memory rose, and passed like a wave that no longer drowned her. I stayed, Sloane said aloud to no one, like you asked. The answer came not in words, but in quiet understanding. Weeks passed. Sloane didn't disappear. She simply lived. No uniform, no call signs. She taught marksmanship to park rangers in the mornings, volunteered at a rehabilitation center in the afternoons, spoke rarely about the past. At night, she slept better than she ever had. Not perfectly, but honestly. Then the news broke. A joint operation, Eastern Corridor stabilized, civilian evacuation successful, no casualties reported. No names mentioned. She watched the footage once, then turned it off. That evening, a message arrived. Encrypted short. We didn't need you there, but we carried you with us. She closed her eyes. For the first time, the weight lifted without leaving emptiness behind. Months later, she stood on a quiet hillside, watching the wind move through tall grass. The compass rested warm against her wrist. She thought of the girl she'd been, small, silent, underestimated. She thought of the woman she became, sharp, scarred, still standing. And she thought of those who would never know her name, but would live because of what she chose to pass on instead of hoard. The world didn't need another legend. It needed continuity. Sloane turned toward the path leading down the hill. Her steps were steady, unhurried, free, because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't demand recognition. It doesn't linger where it's no longer needed. Sometimes dignity teaches, then steps aside, and trusts what it helped shape to endure.